So my first question for everybody, in choosing your subject matter, did you Thank you for joining us for our post-film discussion. We have some questions for our filmmakers today, and I want to thank everybody who's here for joining us. My first question, in choosing your subject matter, how did your film help you connect with your Vietnamese or Asian identity? And I'm going to ask Dinah Lee to go first.
Thanks, Ivy. Yeah, I guess for me, I would say screening it to like other queer Asian audiences definitely helped me connect in that way. And then noticing too that I'm not fluent in Vietnamese, but people that are had attended the screening, and then they would talk to my dad after at one of the screenings he attended, and I learned that we may not speak the same language all the time, but he has a lot more to say in Vietnamese. So it's just like making me want to learn the language more.
Thank you so much for sharing. Amy, I'm going to toss that question to you.
This was such a special film for Marion and I. This was my first time being back in Vietnam. So the character and myself was experiencing this connection with like the homeland, and my character searches for her father. So this deep-rooted need and questions about your identity and like things that just don't make sense, and just being in the home like land, it's like, oh, things just make sense. And there's this fulfilling feeling that comes from just being in the energy of it. So just the presence in itself was very special. And so it kind of was like this meta of like Amy and the strange lady. Yeah.
Yeah, how about you, Marion?
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we shot it. Oh, Mary, we're good. I'll go after Amy because yeah, Amy and I are both based in New Orleans actually, and know each other. Have known each other for a few years, and ended up conjoining a trip to Saigon in January, and yeah, we ended up filming a short there, and obviously this was the first time I ever filmed in Vietnam. It was the first time I made anything in Vietnamese. I'm also very, very far from being fluent in Vietnamese. So that was really interesting, actually, and learned a lot. And also just getting a sense of how, people in Saigon respond to filmmakers. We were very positively welcomed where we were filming, so that was really great. And there were a lot of parallels, like Amy was saying, parallels between our actual experiences and what we were filming as we were filming it, which is kind of the beauty of making art, I think. But in this case, we filmed in a neighborhood called Nguyen Thien Thuot, which is a really visually beautiful, vibrant neighborhood. And actually, I later found out housed American soldiers back in the day. So there was also, that layer adding to this American Viet Kieu woman coming back and looking for her father. And yeah, it was, I would say, the most connected I've ever been to Vietnamese identity, for sure.
Thank you both for sharing. I'm going to toss it now to Mel.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ivy. I think for myself, I have been connected to my Vietnamese identity through observing my parents growing up and trying to understand, okay, there are like some ghosts that linger on their identity. What is that? And how do I make sense of it as a child? And this film was the first time that I've turned my camera on my family. So it's a documentary on my mom. And I think that very intentional time that's spent in the garden with my mom through the gaze of like myself with a camera has made me think about like my Vietnamese identity in a way that is, I've also like done work in New Orleans with Vietnamese communities there. But it feels like a different form of intimacy. And I think it's because it's my mom. And so it feels like I'm more involved with the process as well. So I'm in front of the camera, even though I'm behind the camera in a way.
Thank you so much, Mel. And last but not least, Mary.
Thanks, Ivy. And I really related to everyone's responses as well. I think it's very much connected to my experience as a filmmaker, in particular as a Vietnamese filmmaker. I think for me, it was kind of reconnecting with an inner child, like the age that the characters are set is kind of the age where I started to like maybe subconsciously disconnect from my Vietnamese identity, because I was starting to express my queerness to myself and I felt like they were not aligned. And so I think I put my Vietnamese identity over there and I started to embrace my queer identity more. And now as an adult looking back, realizing that it is connected and that my Vietnameseness and my queerness are not separate at all. They're actually very deeply linked. And so in making the film, I think I was able to connect with a younger version of myself that didn't get to do that. So it was a really emotional experience, but a really beautiful one as well.
Thanks so much for sharing, everybody. And Mary actually like kind of read my mind, because my next question, with this short film collection being titled With Pride, I wanted to ask, how important was it for you all to have created your film as a queer person or with queer characters? And I'm going to start with Dinah-Lee again.
Yes, so the film is, I think Marianne mentioned earlier about parallels too, and so I'm speaking to my parents' younger selves, but the narration that I do is sort of written for them and for my younger self. So yeah, I guess just like, thinking about how we're appealing to that part of ourselves that we really wanted to see, and whether or not we got that from our parents, I think is a theme with all of our shorts, which is kind of funny, and something to be said about sort of like universal experiences, but our films are also all very different, and I love that for us and for myself, and getting to heal that part through my own art making and watching other films as well.
Amy, how about you?
Well, the concept was created by Marianne, but it is really important just to normalize and show up, because most of what we need is to be seen and heard, and so it's just important to represent who you are fully in all the things, and so it's important just to make these realities real and normal and for people to see, and I mean, just basic human need. So it at least that's for me. Yeah.
I think something that's really interesting to me, kind of in general, but is how an experience as a Vietnamese life experience as a Vietnamese person informs our relationships, and what everyone brings baggage from their life into their relationships, and what is it about the Vietnamese experience specifically that we bring into our relationships. And that's what I was really interested in, and I stumbled on this young queer person in Saigon who lives a very vibrant life as a queer DJ, and I was so, I don't even have the word for like how I felt when I met this person and kind of saw her in her environment, and just like the confidence that that she carries. And when I saw that kind of and compared it with the struggles that a lot of queers queer Vietnamese people abroad, have had and continue to have. It was just so interesting to me. This kind of this paradox almost. So I wanted to swim in these complicated things, and I also was really, what Mary said earlier about, feeling like you have to choose between your queerness and your Vietnamese identity. I know a lot of folks have said that to me, and have embraced the film because it allows us to celebrate both. So I think it feels really special and important to work with queer characters.
How about you, Mel?
Yeah, I'm taking in everyone's responses, so it's really nice to just sit with that. But for myself, the film isn't overtly queer, but I think as a queer filmmaker, I want to say that all of my work has a queer gaze and a lens, and it has like my identities attached, like queerness, being Vietnamese, being a person of color from the South. And so I want to say that all of my films have that. And I think also shout out to Mary, but there is a way that this film, I think, talks to my inner child. And I think my inner child didn't really know the language for queerness. And so I wonder how this film, like thinking about it now, how I have that language now, and if my inner child knows that.
Thanks, Mel. And I know, Mary, you kind of partly answered that with my previous question, but was there anything else you wanted to elaborate with this specific question?
I think I have always made queer content and queer films since I started on my filmmaking journey. But I do feel like with each project, I get a little bit closer to showing myself more fully. And so I'm just excited to be always evolving and part of that process. And I think as a queer filmmaker, wanting to put queer characters on screen, because that's, what I know and what I recognize, and I don't get to see that usually. So I think that's the biggest thing. It's like trying to shift things for other people and people who might be coming up like me. Yeah.
Yeah, as someone who is also queer in Viet, like watching your films, I want to thank everybody for sharing their experience and for wanting to have that reflected to our viewers. And so, with that being said, my final general question for everybody, what advice would you give to any Vietnamese filmmakers who may be watching right now? I'll start with you, Dinah-Lee.
I would say to just start making stuff. And, I think I've heard before, like, it's okay if it's really bad also, but like if you made a thing, you made a thing. And like you hadn't made it before. And that's amazing in itself. So keep making things, keep watching things. Sometimes I feel like I forget that I also love watching films, and then like I'll go to a different screening or maybe see something that I hadn't before, and it's like I would never make something like that, but now that I've seen that it can be done in different ways, maybe I'll try. And yeah, there's like lots of stuff that I would say, I'm not going to say it's good or bad, but maybe you don't relate to. And so it's like, but that got made, right? So like make your thing, whatever it is, someone will relate to it. And even if it's just you, just make it. It's okay. And talk to people, of course. Yeah.
Thanks for that advice. Amy or Marion, any advice that you would give?
Oh, I think what's really important is to remember to have fun. Remember the inner child, and the child always wants to have fun and express themselves, and not get caught up in impressing people, but just remember, like, it's from the heart, and your purpose is to express.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, going off both of those, I think this is for anyone who feels like I have just this immense pressure to like represent your people, whether the Vietnamese people or the half Vietnamese people or the queer people or the women or whatever. Like it's so, especially being, you know, where we are at in the history of the Vietnamese diasporic experience, there is immense pressure, you know, to tell the story correctly. And it's taken me a long time to shake that off. And I think start shaking it off as soon as you can, because everything is, if you're just, you know, making what you want to see, that's a really good place to start, and not making what you think other people want to see or need to see.
How about you, Mel?
For Vietnamese filmmakers specifically, I think don't let anyone like doubt your identity. I think for me, it's really hard for me to understand a Vietnamese accent that's not Hue, because that's what my parents speak, and it takes me a minute to like take it in. But that's like specific on language, because folks have spoken about language, so I wouldn't let anyone doubt what your identity is. Um, and for filmmakers in general, I have found that working in collaboration is something that I don't think I can continue without doing. And so I wish I knew that like early on. But I found my people, and I'm really lucky to have found my people. And I think the more that you can see other people that recognize you and work with them, I think it creates really beautiful work.
Thank you. And Mary?
I absolutely second everything that everyone said. And I think kind of building off a lot of the common threads is like, yeah, we don't have to necessarily represent everyone. And if you are specific in what you are saying and to your own experience, you know, no one can tell you that you are wrong. So I think there's only, for each of us and for every Vietnamese filmmaker out there, particularly queer Vietnamese filmmakers, there is only one you, and there is only your perspective. No one else can have that. So I think, and that can be really scary. I was definitely very scared of that when I was starting out, and still am scared of that every single day that I create. But I think if I can impart one thing, it's probably like, it's okay to be scared, and it's okay to lean into the things that you're not sure about or afraid of. And sometimes that can actually take you to where you want to go.
Thanks, everybody, for indulging me with these questions. I wanted to take some time to ask some dedicated questions to our filmmakers today, starting with Hi Ading, directed by Dinah Lee Tran. So in your film, you imagine facing your parents' younger selves. Do you think that by asking these questions to your parents' younger selves as opposed to their older selves, their present day selves, are you looking into a mirror?
Thank you for that very insightful question. Yeah, absolutely. When I started this project, like in scanning all these photos too of my parents from the like 80s and 90s, like before they had any kids, before they were married, I was, you know, like reminded that like we grew up and our parents have always been our parents, but they were their own people at one point and still are their own people and individuals. Um, so yeah, just like I was 29 at the time where I made this short. And so reflecting on like, what were they thinking about at 29? They would have talked about marriage and like having kids, and like how that trajectory is very different than the life that I am leading. And yeah, just, you know, sort of coming at it with compassion and, you know, acknowledging all the things that they had to do to get to where they are in order for me to live my life and be myself. And kind of like reminding both parties that like we're individuals and like we love each other, but like we might not see eye to eye all the time. And maybe you had that with your parents as well. And like it's okay that all happened and we're here now. So yeah, just coming at it from that sort of, not necessarily like forgiveness is the right word. I don't know if that's the right word, but that's where I was coming from at the time, and just sort of like making peace with like, why didn't they like teach me their language? Well, because they had to assimilate, and like when they immigrated to Toronto. But yeah, just I guess a lot of reflecting on where they were in their lives at that time and where I am now, being 31.
Yeah, and when I was watching your film, I really had to kind of pause myself to think about how I would answer your questions. And for you now, how would you answer, how would the current you answer your questions if an older you asked them?
So if like future me asked current me,
Exactly. If, like, somehow your older self was able to time travel to ask you now, when you're making this film, would that, what would that conversation look like?
I guess funny tangent. Before I started this project, I had a dream that I saw my younger self, which was really strange. And like, I just saw this like little kid that like had the same like smile and like dimples as me, and I was like, oh, we look happy. Um, and so I hopefully that I future me would get to see me like that and just be like, oh, like we're okay, like even right now, like I'm, different times, but like I'll be okay, and that future me is coming to like just tell me you're gonna be all right, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is the thought is like a really big comfort, and it's really cool that you had a dream looking at your younger self and wishing that you can just tell them, you'll be okay, because you are now. Thank you so much, Dinah Lee. I'm going to move over to Spring Will Come with Amy and Marion. So when I was watching your film, to me, there seemed to be like this buildup of tension that seems to kind of permeate from every character in the film, and I interpreted it as like guilt until the release of like Van's and Lee's argument, to like Linda's like kind of big lamenting over her father. So was that what you intended for your audience to feel, was like tension and release, what you wanted to have your audience feel when they're watching?
So there was no script going into filming. We had characters and we had location, and I had a whole bunch of ideas and a few lines, and so I can't say I had any intention behind the result of what the film would be. Even like the length, it's 16 minutes. I was like, we're gonna make a 5-minute film, y'all. It's gonna be chill. So I knew, I wanted to explore. My family is full of like very hard people, like who are very much push away softness, and I knew that was something that also, that like I mentioned earlier, I've carried into my own relationships, and so I knew I wanted to explore this idea of softness in a queer relationship and in a Vietnamese person, and see how they interact and what they can kind of get out of each other. And I think the way that Amy kind of brought this very cathartic release in real time for the camera, like that wasn't planned at all. Yeah, that's where she went, and it was really special. What do you think, Amy?
I mean, I guess you just can't help at some point it's just gonna blow. So like there was this, we, you know, yeah, it was really kind of really cool and organic, and we didn't know it was gonna happen, but I guess that's just the natural thing, is that at a certain point it has to come out. So yeah.
Mhm. And I think like a big part of, you know, this experience of looking for something but not knowing what you're looking for, but at some point you have to release something, you know. And the moment where she does, like, she doesn't really find what she was looking for, but the tension of her life has been so unresolved for so long that it just kind of you know, it's ready to come out, and she just lets it come out. So yeah, I think that ended up being a really important theme.
That is such a really cool like tidbit, Mary, that you shared, that like this coming to this film there wasn't much of a script, and it seemed so organic watching everybody on that film kind of go through the process of grief, with like relationships and with other people. And so my next question for you both, to you, what would you consider to be spring for each of your characters, since your film is titled Spring Will Come?
Go ahead, Amy.
Spring for my character, I guess it was kind of like her whole life she's had this ghost of a father, and his absence had such a presence on her, and it was just to the point where she just couldn't take it anymore. So it's kind of like death in fall and winter, and then with the death of her father, and this life, it's like the beginning of the rest of her life. So spring is just being free of all of this heaviness and resentment and anger and the unknown and all the stories. Yeah, being free of this ghost and living as you would do in spring. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I'll take a different angle, which is that where the title came from was actually, so I used a lot of old Bang Nhạc Vietnamese music from like 50s, 60s throughout the film, a lot of which just sort of came to me through online channels. And there was this theme in a lot of the songs that were speaking to me, which is spring. A lot of songs from that period are singing about spring and when spring will come. And even the word for youth, tuổi trẻ, has the word, man, I'm butchering it. Tuổi xuân, I think, means youth, right? So like youthful years, and has the word spring in it. And I thought that was so cool. So yeah, I was thinking about, what are all these people singing about in this period, this idea that things will get better, that once, there's a lot of pain now, but spring is on the other end. And I think that applies to so many things historically and in present life.
I was really rooting for everybody in Spring Will Come. So thank you both for your input. And now I'm going to move over to Mel for your film, Mekong. And so in portraying the relationship that your mother has with your grandmother, do you find your own relationship mirrored with your own mother?
Yeah, that's a complex question. Thank you for it. I think in a way I was trying to explore this intergenerational relationship with mother-daughter, because I didn't really have a relationship with my grandma. It was like all through stories from my mom. And I think I am trying to understand like my relationship to my mom in a way where she has a very specific role in my life, like as a mother, as someone who has a relationship to my father, and I have like a poor relationship to him. And so it's like these dynamics of how do I still have a good relationship to my mom and fulfill this role that I want to have as a daughter to her, while still having a complicated relationship to my dad, even though that isn't addressed at all in the film. And I think in the making of this film, I understand my mom more as a child and like the joy that she has in terms of telling me stories about her mom and of her childhood and playing in Vietnam and growing up. And I think for myself, like I grew up having pity for my mom in that she had to leave Vietnam. She had to like assume this role as a mother, like not knowing if she wanted that or if she was like fulfilling a very gendered role that Vietnamese women had and sometimes continue to have. And so I think it's like undoing some of these like emotions that come with assumptions and actually getting to know my mom as more of a multidimensional person, of holding multiple identities that I don't have to make these assumptions of, that I can like sit down and listen to her talk, and observe her. And I think like through hearing these stories about her own relationship to her mom, I think my own relationship to her is mirrored in a way in that it's an abundance of love and it's an abundance of like joy and laughter. And I think about how much I'll miss her, like if I didn't have access to her anymore. But in a way, like she still has access to her own mom through being in the garden. And so I'm thinking of like, okay, I think I'll continue to have access to her no matter where I am.
That's very sweet. Thank you. And I'm glad that you mentioned your mom's garden because it's going to come up with this next question. So I actually myself, my mom, who's Viet, loves spending time in her garden. And I always wonder, why. So in your film, you have a lot of footage of your mom being in her own garden. So what do you think your mom finds when she's in her garden?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that's buried and that grows. It's her relationship to Vietnam. Like she grows up nang rau muong, like all these like things that are such a reminder, I think, of what she grew up like sugarcane too, that she grew up eating and just being surrounded by. I think like the tenderness that she shows when she's watering her plants or like her hand in soil, and like the care that she has for these things that she's like nurturing and nourishing. It feels like how she would give care to her mom in a way, like if her mom was still here. And so it's like both. I can see her taking care of these like plants as they're growing up as children, but then also like what would it look like if they were older in a way. And so I think in my mom's garden, there's like so much of her history and her identity and her memories. I think a lot of memories, even though there's stuff that's created in the States now, it like is so heavy with memories of Vietnam, I think. And I've had the experience of going back to Hue like a few times, like both with my family and on my own, spending time with my family over there. And I like can feel it mirrored quite a bit. And so I think that's what's in her garden. I don't know. I should ask my mom that too.
That would be, I mean, I would love to hear what your mom answers to this question. Thank you, Mel. And so we're going to move on to our last film for our selection with Viv Silly Mango. So Mary, this film was such like a fun take on the like preteen coming of age story with a queer and Asian lens that I wish I had when I was younger. But if you had something like Viv's Silly Mango to resonate with growing up, what would you imagine your life to be like now?
Gosh, huge question. It's funny, isn't it? Because it's like, I can never know. I can absolutely never know what it would have been like. And like part of why my team and I really wanted to make Viv Silly Mango was to give that for a younger generation. But I just imagine, I don't know, I guess that things wouldn't have been, the journey would be so different. I actually have a sister who is queer as well, and we still, you know, we grew up in the same house and still had really vastly different experiences coming into queerness. And so I think it's just so incredible to think about. Like, I think we've talked about it. She's like, I didn't struggle the way that you did. And I think it's just so interesting that even when someone's gone through the experience or a very similar experience that I had when I was younger and still come out of it very different to me, it's just so hard to know what it would have been like. But I can just imagine that I probably would have been a lot more confident as a young person. And I can imagine that I probably wouldn't have kept people at a distance. And in my kind of young adulthood and then coming into my 20s, I guess, like, it was a lot of unlearning and a lot of trying to shift out of the things that I had taught myself and obviously been pushed down on me from external forces, but it was nothing that anyone ever really said explicitly to me, like, you have to be small. But I think I just would have learnt to stand with my shoulders back and like speak with my whole chest, you know?
Thank you so much for that. And so I love the confidence that your characters in Viv's Silly Mango like either have already or like they grow into it. And so my question for you is like, what about the Riot Girl genre of music like called to you to make this film from like an Asian perspective?
So I actually listened to a lot of Riot Girl when I was that age. My older sister used to listen to a lot of alternative music and put me onto it. And I just felt really called to it. It was loud and brash, and, you know, I felt like I had been taught to be quiet or had learned to quiet parts of myself. So I think internally I felt like I was screaming, and then there was this music that was screaming, and I'm like, oh my God, could I be screaming? And so I think it was something that I really connected to as a young person, particularly, you know, a lot of it was queer and a lot of it was very like proud of who they were. And I just felt like I wasn't that at that stage. And so I really connected to it as a young person. And then when my team and I were developing Viv Silly Mango, we knew we wanted it to be about friendship, and we knew that we wanted it to be about music. And the audience was always for young people. And so I went away and I did a little bit of research and was thinking about it and thinking about my younger self. And in a way, like, Viv's, for my whole team, is a reimagining of what our experiences as young people could have been. And so I was like, okay, well, I listened to Riot Girl. Let's see what we can put in there. And then I was doing a bit of research and learnt about Emily's Sassy Lime, the band, which I hadn't actually listened to before. And they were a group of teenage Asian people who formed a Riot Girl band. And I thought that was really cool. And I thought that would be a really great starting point for our story, that these three Asian girls come together to form this band. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for spending time with me today, discussing and sharing about your process and your kind of your mind and your heart behind the films that you've made. And so not only did this selection of films come from a queer perspective or featuring queer characters, to kind of like encapsulate some other things that I've noticed across your films, I found a common theme of like evoking the sense of like longing for childhood, for answers, for connection. And so my last question to everybody here in making your film, were you able to find or catch what it was that you're longing for? I'm going to start with Dinah Lee again.
I thought it would change, but I guess not. I mean, I think that this feeling is always going to be there. But I make art so that I remind myself that it's okay that it's there. So no, I guess is the short answer. But the long-ish answer is a friend of mine in a time where I was like, really going through identity stuff, reminded me that we're not separated by oceans, we're connected by them. So yeah, just, like thinking about that connection, and you can build towards that too. So I don't know. Answer is no, but it's okay also. And like I think a lot of us relate to that feeling, and you make home wherever you are, and so like yeah, I guess yes and no.
I love how real that answer is, because honestly, if life would be easier if like we did find the things that we longed for. But yeah, Amy and Marian, how about you?
Okay, I'll go first. This film just awoken a lot for me. I think for also Marian as well. I feel like we just hold on. I mean, I guess for myself, like there's just something about being in Saigon and the energy, and I found things I didn't think I was gonna discover about myself. Um, if anything, it ignited, it gave me fire, and there's just more that I want to do for myself and for in this creative process. So uh I guess I found something I didn't realize I was going to find. And I guess that's probably the deep unknown longing of I don't know, inspiration and just identity and possibilities. Thinking out the box. So yeah, it just opened a whole new world.
I'm thinking about how longing and the experience of not knowing kind of go together, and it makes a lot of sense that as people we experience longing because there's so much that we don't know across all cultures, I think. And yeah, kind of what Dinah said definitely resonated. There's, growth is almost the knowing that you must embrace this longing and embrace this not knowing. And in relationships too, I mean, this film speaks to like a breakup and how hard it is, I think, especially in queer relationships, to let each other go. And because of the fear of the unknown of what follows. And once we are at peace with not knowing, it becomes easier to embrace longing and embrace the unknown.
Thank you both. Mel, I'm gonna pass it on to you.
Yeah, I don't know how to follow that up. I'm a yearner and a longer at heart, so it like runs in the blood deep. I think for making films specifically, I mean, there's so much that I long for, but I want to say that I long for language and a means of communication, and this gets me a step closer. I don't know if there's like a pinnacle of that or like a time where I'll be like, yeah, I feel like I got that. I feel like I'm done. Because I think like people are just so expansive. Identities are so expansive. And I hope to be one of the people that like just keeps on expanding. And I think this is like a yes and a no, and like a yes and a future of like, yeah, I want more.
Thank you, Mel. Mary, how about you?
Yes, gosh, huge question, and everyone answered it so beautifully, and I just think, you know, it's definitely a yes and a no, and longing is a bit ingrained as well. I think in many ways the film itself feels like we were able to find it in that, you know, agency for young people, but it also felt like it opened a whole new can of worms for me, in that, hey, I really want to like make things that are specifically queer and Vietnamese, and it's been really exciting to be like, okay, there's so much room here for me to grow and shift and evolve, and yeah, it's been really interesting. I don't know that it will ever be something that I can hold, and I think that's actually a really beautiful thing. Like something that I'm starting to develop a new project, and it's about trying to recognize that culture is always evolving, and even if you don't feel like you fit Vietnamese culture in a particular way, that doesn't mean that you are not expressing and experiencing Vietnamese culture, because it is who you are. And so I think Viv Silly Mango really started me thinking about that more. And I just want to say as well, I think this chat has also helped me get me a little bit closer to that longing, because this has been just a really special discussion. Like, it's been beautiful to hear everyone speak, and it's been beautiful to hear language. And I mean, I'm based in Australia, and I am not very connected to a lot of queer Vietnamese filmmakers, so it's just been really awesome.
Hopefully everybody gets a chance to come visit Orange County, where all the Viets are at. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining our post-film discussion today. I hope that in me asking these questions and you answering, that you were able to get something out of discussion. When I thought of these questions, I definitely was like, well, I feel like all of these films have made me cry, so I wonder if I can get them to like cry a little, like when I'm asking these questions. And I hope that our viewers tonight also enjoyed this discussion. And so it was really great to meet everybody, and and I hope that you all have a great rest of your life in exploring what creativity means to you. And so with that, I'm just going to say goodbye. Thank you so much.